So we're getting into the final years of Elizabeth I's reign now. What challenges did she face as she got older?
As Elizabeth grew older, she faced a lot of challenges, both at home and abroad. One of the biggest was the Essex Rebellion in 1601, led by Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex.
Essex was once one of Elizabeth's favorites. He was a charming and ambitious nobleman, but their relationship soured over time, partly because Essex failed in his military campaigns, especially in Ireland.
Right, Ireland was a big problem for her reign, wasn't it?
Yes, Ireland was always a thorn in Elizabeth I's side. There were several uprisings, the most significant being the 9 Years' War, which started in 1594. Essex was sent there to put down the rebellion, but he didn't do well, and that strained his relationship with Elizabeth.
Exactly. After returning from Ireland without the Queen's permission, Essex felt sidelined. His frustration grew, and in 1601 he led a rebellion against Elizabeth, hoping to seize power.
Wow, that's a bold move. How did she handle that?
She handled it decisively. The rebellion was quickly crushed, and Essex was arrested. Elizabeth had no choice but to execute him for treason, even though it was a difficult decision for her, given their past relationship.
It's said that Elizabeth was heartbroken by Essex's betrayal. Some historians believe that his execution marked a turning point for her, and she became more isolated in her later years.
I can imagine that would be tough, especially losing someone she was once close to. What about abroad? Was England still at war?
Yes, the war with Spain continued, though by the 1590s it had turned into more of a stalemate. England didn't have the resources to defeat Spain outright, but they were able to defend themselves and maintain a naval presence.
There were also concerns about succession. Elizabeth never named an heir, and as she grew older, people started to worry about what would happen after she died. That uncertainty caused a lot of anxiety.
So she never officially named her successor?
No, she didn't, but it was widely understood that James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary I of Scots, would likely take the throne. Elizabeth avoided the issue publicly because naming a successor could have sparked rebellion.
Right, and even though there were tensions between England and Scotland, Elizabeth knew that a peaceful transition was necessary to avoid civil war. When she died in 1603, James became James I of England, uniting the two crowns.
That's quite the political balancing act. So what was Elizabeth's legacy, after all was said and done?
Her legacy is immense. Elizabeth I's reign is remembered as a golden age for England. She established a relatively stable government, expanded England's influence overseas, and presided over a cultural renaissance.
And she left behind a strong sense of national identity. After years of religious conflict, Elizabeth helped solidify Protestantism in England and created a sense of unity that carried forward into the reign of James I.
It sounds like her impact went far beyond just her time on the throne.
Exactly, Chris. Elizabeth I was more than just a survivor. She was a leader who helped shape the future of England. Her reign laid the foundation for what would later become the British Empire.
And even though she never married or had children, Elizabeth is remembered as the mother of her nation. Her image as the Virgin Queen became a powerful symbol of England's independence and strength.
It's really amazing how one person could have such a lasting influence. Do you think she ever regretted not marrying or naming an heir?
That's a question historians still debate. Some think Elizabeth regretted her decision in her final years, especially as she became more isolated. But others argue that she was fiercely independent and saw her decision as a way to maintain control over her kingdom.
We'll probably never know for sure, but what's clear is that Elizabeth made her choices with her country in mind. In the end, she succeeded in leaving behind a stable and unified England.
Well, I've certainly learned a lot about Elizabeth I today. Thanks, Jesse and Emily, for all the insights.
It was our pleasure, Chris. Elizabeth's story is one of the most fascinating in history, and there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. We're glad we could dive into it with you.
We've covered so much of Elizabeth I's life, but I'm curious what happened after she passed away.
After Elizabeth's death in 1603, James VI of Scotland became James I of England, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. This period marked the beginning of the Stuart dynasty in England.
That's right. James I's reign brought a shift in political and cultural life, but he also inherited a lot of the issues Elizabeth had left behind, like the religious tensions between Catholics and Protestants.
Did he manage those religious conflicts well?
Not really, Chris. James tried to appease both sides, but it didn't work out very well. In 1605, there was the infamous Gunpowder Plot, a failed attempt by a group of Catholic conspirators, including Guy Fawkes, to blow up the Houses of Parliament and assassinate James.
Yes, the Gunpowder Plot is one of the most famous events of James's reign. It was a reaction to his failure to grant greater religious tolerance to Catholics, which they had hoped for after Elizabeth's more rigid policies.
Wow, so religious tensions continued to be a huge issue even after Elizabeth I's time.
Absolutely. In fact, those tensions would continue to plague England throughout the Stuart period and into the English Civil War. But James's reign wasn't all about conflict. There were also some significant achievements.
That's true. One of the most lasting legacies of James I's reign is the King James Bible, which was completed in 1611. It's still considered one of the most influential English translations of the Bible ever made.
I've heard of that. So James's reign wasn't just about keeping the peace. It had cultural importance too.
Yes, the King James Bible had a massive impact on the English language and culture. But culturally, this period was also important for the development of the arts. Shakespeare was still writing during James's reign, and the royal court continued to be a center for drama and music.
James's court, however, was quite different from Elizabeth's. Where Elizabeth had been more cautious and pragmatic, James was known for being more extravagant. He loved hosting lavish banquets and spending money on his favorites at court, which didn't go over well with Parliament.
It sounds like he had a very different style of leadership compared to Elizabeth I.
Exactly. While Elizabeth had managed to keep a careful balance between the crown and Parliament, James struggled with this relationship. His belief in the divine right of kings, that monarchs were chosen by God and therefore had absolute authority, put him at odds with Parliament.
And that struggle between the monarchy and Parliament would only intensify after James's death. His son, Charles I, would inherit those same conflicts, and they would eventually lead to the English Civil War.
So even though Elizabeth I had kept things relatively stable, it sounds like the country still faced major issues after her death.
That's right. Elizabeth's death didn't immediately bring about chaos, but it did leave unresolved tensions that would eventually come to a head. The Stuart dynasty faced much greater challenges than Elizabeth did in terms of managing the balance of power between the monarchy, Parliament, and the people.
Exactly. And while Elizabeth is remembered for her success in creating stability and fostering culture, the Stuarts are often remembered for their conflicts and the eventual fall of the monarchy, at least temporarily.
I can see how her reign was really a turning point for England, setting up a lot of what came afterward. What do you think is the most important thing to remember about Elizabeth I's legacy?
For me, it's her ability to navigate a male-dominated world and emerge as one of the most powerful and successful monarchs in English history. She created an image of herself that resonated with her people and still does today.
I agree. I think her legacy also lies in the cultural flourishing of the Elizabethan era, as well as her diplomatic skills in handling both domestic and foreign affairs. She left behind a country that was more unified than when she found it, even if the stability didn't last forever.
It's amazing to think about how much influence one person can have on the course of history. I've learned so much about Elizabeth I through these talks. Thanks, Jesse and Emily, for guiding us through her incredible life.
It's been a pleasure, Chris. Elizabeth I's reign is a fascinating chapter in history, and it's always great to revisit it.
Absolutely. I'm glad we could share her story and dive into the lasting impact of her time on the throne.